A new leak just changed everything. Red Bull's 2026 engine appears to generate free horsepower using a compression trick that activates only when the pistons are red hot. It's not technically illegal, but it's so controversial, Ferrari, Honda, and Audi have already filed complaints with the FIA. And here's what nobody's admitting publicly: if the FIA doesn't block it before March, Verstappen could start the 2026 season with an engine no one else can match. But here's the real twist: if a last-minute directive lands, Red Bull may not even have the tools to fix it in time. Red Bull's 2026 engine program has always been shrouded in calculated silence. Ever since their split from Honda was confirmed and the Ford partnership unveiled, the messaging from Milton Keynes has been carefully controlled: projected confidence, vague timelines, and tightly managed access to the development story. But despite the PR gloss, one detail has become impossible to ignore: no other team has seen performance data like Red Bull's. And that's exactly what's making their rivals nervous. Because beneath the optimism, the gap in transparency has created the perfect breeding ground for suspicion, and now, thanks to a leak, that suspicion is becoming something far more dangerous. The official regulations for 2026 were supposed to reset the field. With tighter hybrid integration, fuel flow limitations, and a 50-50 energy split between combustion and electric systems, the FIA wanted to eliminate loopholes. Every manufacturer received the same rules. The goal was balance, predictability. But Red Bull didn't just accept those limitations, they quietly vanished into them. While Mercedes, Audi, and Ferrari held technical briefings and publicized power unit milestones, Red Bull offered next to nothing. No benchmarks. No audio clips. No thermal efficiency declarations. Just vague references to aggressive innovation. And that absence of detail is now starting to look deliberate. Because now that internal data has leaked, teams are seeing the outlines of something they weren't prepared for. The simulations show a hybrid deployment pattern no one expected. Instead of distributing energy in smooth waves like every current hybrid power unit, Red Bull's maps show a delayed release, stacked on top of thermal load cycles in a way that suggests a far more complex combustion control system. What it means, in simple terms, is that the engine seems to gain power in conditions that should produce losses. That isn't just unusual, it's systemically disruptive. And here's where things get truly uncomfortable for the FIA. According to multiple sources, the leaked files didn't break any technical regulations. There was no overfueling, no energy overuse, no breach of combustion limits. Everything, at least on paper, was compliant. But the behavior of the engine, particularly how it behaves under high load, wasn't anticipated by the regulatory writers. It lives in a blind spot. A place where the current rulebook simply doesn't reach. And that's what makes it a threat. Because when something is invisible to the law, it's impossible to legislate until it's too late. Rivals aren't accusing Red Bull of cheating. Not yet. But the tone of the conversations has shifted dramatically. According to internal briefings, Ferrari and Honda have already submitted formal requests for clarification to the FIA, carefully worded, diplomatically framed, but laser-focused on one issue: whether Red Bull's thermal fluctuation behavior violates the spirit of energy flow regulation. And that phrase, the spirit of the regulation, is always the first move in a technical war. Because once that language is on the table, the question is no longer whether Red Bull is legal, it's whether the FIA will let them stay legal. For now, the FIA is trapped. If they issue a clarification too soon, they risk being seen as targeting a specific team before testing even begins. But if they wait until March, and Red Bull shows up with a power unit no one else can match, it will ignite a scandal far worse than anything we saw in the V6 turbo era. Because unlike 2019, when Ferrari's questionable fuel flow strategy created suspicion but no proof, this time the evidence already exists and the clock is ticking. And still, Red Bull says nothing. No comment on the leak. No acknowledgement of the pressure mounting behind the scenes. That silence isn't just strategic, it's ominous. Because if Red Bull truly believes their design is untouchable, they won't move unless they're forced to. And if the FIA doesn't act before the engine frees, that might be exactly what happens. The leak didn't explode onto social media or land on the front page of Autosport. It crept quietly through engineering circles and encrypted emails, where only a handful of senior figures had access. Red Bull's internal simulation data, part of a mandatory submission process for FIA review, was seen by regulatory analysts and, eventually, by rival teams with clearance. The data wasn't meant to be shared. But once viewed, it couldn't be unseen. Because buried in the technical documentation was a series of combustion behavior patterns that defied the expected norms of hybrid electric engine dynamics. What was supposed to be routine compliance suddenly looked like a breakthrough or a violation in disguise. What made it so unsettling wasn't just the numbers, it was what those numbers implied. In Red Bull's thermal efficiency graphs, engineers from at least 2 rival teams noticed something that didn't fit: a distinct power gain that kicked in only at high combustion temperatures. That's not inherently illegal. But what it suggests is that Red Bull has designed an engine that performs better once it crosses a thermal stress threshold, which goes against everything we know about powertrain stability. In essence, while other teams are trying to avoid heat saturation, Red Bull appears to be weaponizing it. Digging deeper, the data revealed torque spikes that coincided with specific timing windows that suggest Red Bull may be staging micro-ignition cycles across a modified combustion chamber geometry. It's a complex concept, but the practical effect is stunning. The engine appears to momentarily behave like a larger displacement unit without breaching any fuel flow limits. One senior engineer reportedly described it as a legal twin pulse trick, a system that releases stored thermal energy at just the right moment to amplify propulsion. This isn't just clever. It's disruptive. As the documents circulated through technical departments, the response wasn't disbelief, it was fear. Engineers at Mercedes and Ferrari, having reviewed the same data, didn't accuse Red Bull of cheating. Instead, they began reworking their own engine modeling to try and replicate what Red Bull had found. Not to copy it, but to understand how badly it could skew the 2026 balance of power. Because if the FIA allows it, every manufacturer will have to rethink their entire combustion strategy at enormous cost and under extreme time pressure. It's not just a trick. It's a reset button. The true complexity lies in how difficult this system is to detect. On paper, the fuel flow remains within limits. The electric deployment obeys recovery caps. But the performance gain is conditional. It only activates under racing conditions, when the engine has reached a state of thermal equilibrium. That means dyno testing won't reveal it. Bench simulations won't trigger it. Only full load, race replica running will expose the behavior. And that's what terrifies teams, because unless someone catches it before engine freeze, the FIA won't be able to intervene without rewriting the entire rulebook. This is why the tone has shifted from confusion to alarm. Ferrari has reportedly initiated a second inquiry, not to question Red Bull directly, but to request clarification on how temperature-induced torque events are defined within the 2026 framework. Audi's new power unit division has begun testing alternate ignition mapping theories, hoping to find their own legal workaround. And Honda, Red Bull's former partner, is said to be reviewing whether the architecture they helped design before exiting the project contains the foundation for this controversial trick. If so, the implications could stretch back further than anyone expected. Yet, through it all, Red Bull remains silent. No leaks from inside Milton Keynes. No statements from Ford. No denials, no explanations, just total radio silence. And that's what makes this leak different. Because in Formula One, denial is easy. You only stay quiet when you have something too sensitive to explain. And right now, Red Bull's silence is speaking louder than any press release. In Formula One, the biggest innovations are never obvious. They're hidden not in defiance of the rules, but in the voids between them. And that's exactly where Red Bull seems to be operating. The combustion pattern discovered in their 2026 engine files doesn't scream illegality. It whispers something more dangerous, that the engine was designed for a world the FIA hasn't written rules for yet. It's not a loophole in the traditional sense. It's an entirely new axis of performance, one the sports regulatory body hasn't anticipated, defined, or contained. What makes this situation uniquely volatile is the nature of the FIA's hybrid regulations. These rules are written for systems that behave predictably: standard fuel flow, controlled ignition timing, managed electric deployment. But Red Bull's engine appears to introduce an adaptive combustion phase, where pressure peaks are redistributed mid-cycle based on heat saturation and load duration. That kind of behavior doesn't just bypass traditional performance limits. It makes them irrelevant. And worse, it does so in a way the rulebook never directly forbids. Which means the only thing standing in its way is a late-stage technical directive, or a political decision made under duress. The FIA is cornered. If they let this innovation pass, they risk turning the 2026 season into a one-team spectacle. But if they ban it without legal precedent, they risk launching an internal war, one that calls into question the entire spirit of innovation the sport relies on. This is not theoretical. These moments have happened before. Think of DAS in 2020. Think of Ferrari's fuel flow scandal in 2019. Each time, the FIA had to act not just as a regulator, but as a negotiator between technology and fairness. And this time, the stakes are even higher because once engines are homologated, they're frozen. There's no undo button. Red Bull's silence also plays into the ambiguity. The team isn't claiming the design is within the rules. They're not even engaging in the conversation. And that sends a clear message: we don't need to justify it unless you make us. It's the same strategy they used during the flexible wing saga, and the floor plank investigations play within the lines until the lines are redrawn. That approach isn't arrogant. It's tactical. Because in a sport defined by milliseconds and gray areas, the fastest team is often the one who doesn't wait for permission. And let's not forget what's really at stake here. This isn't just about combustion. It's about momentum, technical, political, and psychological. If Red Bull walks into 2026 with an engine that's not only legal but unbeatable, the rest of the grid will be forced into a reactive posture. That changes how they spend money, how they structure upgrades, how they pressure the FIA. It's a power shift, one that could cascade into the kind of dominance we saw during the V8 and early hybrid eras. And it would all be built on a system the FIA never saw coming until it was too late. From the outside, it's easy to assume this is just another Red Bull masterstroke, another case of clever engineering that everyone will eventually mimic. But inside the paddock, the mood is very different. What they're seeing isn't just cleverness. It's asymmetry. An engine that doesn't follow the same physical rules, because it's designed to weaponize an area of the combustion process that everyone else avoided out of fear or uncertainty. That's not innovation in a vacuum. That's innovation designed to trap everyone else into rewriting their playbook from scratch. And the final problem? This innovation might not be exclusive. If the FIA rules it legal, every team will be forced to pursue it. Which means cascading development costs, risky architectural changes, and a surge of technical instability across the grid. So the real question isn't just whether Red Bull has broken the rules. It's whether they've built something so far ahead of the rules that the rest of Formula One might never catch up.